Awesome. So we are going to get started. Thanks everyone for joining. I know that, you must be incredibly busy at this time, but we thought that it'd be really important to carve out just 30 minutes to go over and share some best practices on what other schools are doing. Um, the 5 key areas that we're going to go over today are not going to be a surprise to anyone. I don't think these are all the areas that, a lot of folks have been struggling with or have had questions on, especially from the Dean's List users that we work with. And through that process, we've gotten some really good responses on what other schools are doing. So we definitely wanted to make sure that we're sharing these with you. So obviously the 5 areas are going to be attendance, communication, protocols on escalating support, assignments and reports. And we are super excited to share these with you. And before we dive into that, I just want to start off on a positive note. And if you could just share in the chat about something that's going well for you or your school. So it could be, brag about your staff members and how amazing your teachers have been, or just share a personal accomplishment. I hear that a lot of people are baking some really great sourdough breads. Personally, for me, I've been able to sort out all of my boxes and recycle them in my apartment, and I consider that a very big personal achievement. But yeah, we just want you to think about something that's been going well and then put them in the chat if you're brave enough to share them, so that we have some sort of, like an air of positivity to start us off with. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to do that. They are now all video stars. That is correct. Banana bread is always good. I hear that there's been a lot of baking of banana breads as well. Anybody else have anything positive? Yeah, amazing. A raised garden bed. That sounds really impressive, actually. Yeah, I mean, feel free to keep these achievements coming, even as I speak. These are all super interesting. Awesome. So to start off with, I want to give a really quick introduction to Dean's List. And for a lot of you that are joining today, you are already Dean's List users, so you will be familiar with this, but there are some folks who are joining who are not yet Dean's List users. So I just want to make sure that we cover, who we are first. And Dean's List is a software platform that targets these areas of focus that you see here. And our purpose is basically to make educators' lives easier and, enable them to be their most effective and streamlined processes, so that they have the time and the tools to focus on students and actually the education part of schools, which is the most important. And you might be wondering, well, why are we hosting this webinar? So we actually work with a lot of different types of schools across the board, and we've already hosted a COVID closure response webinar already, and we have learned and shared best practice ideas with all these different types of schools already, many of which are applicable even if you don't have the Dean's List software, and those are the types of tips that we're going to go over today. And we just want to make sure that every school, regardless of whether you have Dean's List or not at your disposal, are best equipped to deal with the situation that we have right now, because it is very uncharted territory for everybody. In light of the COVID closures, we are also launching a dedicated Slack channel that is going to be available to users for more best practice sharing ideas as they come along, as well as just to share information about what's going well, what could be improved, etc. during this time. And we will be inviting Dean's List users to this Slack channel in batches and waves. So if you would like to get in on this in the first couple of waves, definitely feel free to reach out to us at support, and we would be happy to put you in there. So to get started with the first area that we talked about, we want to discuss attendance because obviously that's very important during this distance learning time. And one really important thing to note about this is that there's a lot of uncertainty around state requirements on attendance now, because this is such a new concept, right? And that can be really daunting, but we also really invite educators to think of this as an opportunity for a different schedule. And you could set new goals around how you want your virtual schools to work. So for example, you could set goals around, giving teachers more prep time, because even the most experienced teachers might find this time period super overwhelming, right? So you could adjust your school day and structure it to allow more time for your teachers. And we will go over some different types of restructuring of the school day that other schools have adopted. And you'll also notice that, some schools haven't decided whether these distance learning days are going to count as a school day or not yet, and how they're going to count or what the requirements are going to be. And during this time of uncertainty, you definitely also want to make sure that you're still incentivizing students to show up and continue to attend classes and, complete their work as best as they can so that their learning isn't interrupted. And we want to prepare for all scenarios for state reporting if they ever do come up with something. So just to share some ideas on how we can collect this data during this time. So I want to go over a few different types of school days that other schools have implemented so far. So school A that we're going to go over does every class each day in set time blocks over Google Classroom or over Zoom. So this is a much more traditional schedule, and they still send notifications after first period for absences, just like in a normal school day. A lot of schools have already been doing that even when we were in distance learning mode, right? Something that the school does differently now that we're in distance learning mode is they then send a comprehensive list later in the day of all the classes that the student has missed, so that families are up to date on what actually happened during the school day. School B adopted a different kind of schedule that cuts teaching time by half for teachers. So they divide up the day by AM and PM sessions. And that's the schedule that you're seeing right now on the screen in the picture. And the purpose of this is basically, so if you're an ELA teacher, you probably were teaching 4 to 5 sections per day. But now they are changing that up so that, you're only teaching 2 classes a day in the morning. That frees up your afternoon. That gives you more time to prep. That gives you more time to, go over what happened in the morning as well as to make calls. So that is a remedy that this school came up with. And again, at the end of the day, they will send notifications to students and families, and also grade level teams for this particular school are the ones that follow up at the end of each day with the families. And a small tip here is if you have any kind of auto dialer available to you, definitely use that and take advantage of it, because this can be a lot of different calls that you're going to have to make. And then there's also the scenario of, well, what if your school doesn't do live sessions of classes or timed classes like those other 2 schools that I just gave the examples of, right? So in that case, you can use a couple of different things as proxies to count as quote unquote attendance, even if, students aren't attending classes live time. So one example is there's a school in California that has decided to email out Google Form surveys to their students every morning, and the students complete it. And you could ask different kinds of questions on that. You could do like a wellness check, or you could ask, how are their assignments going, things like that. And teachers will count the responses as the proxies for attendance that day, and then again follow up with the students that didn't return the survey. And another school is using assignments as proxies. So, you could distribute the assignments through like Google Docs or Google Classroom, whatever platform you use, or emails. And they are just counting that as attendance for having quote unquote attended class that day. And then next we want to talk about communication and family engagement. But before we get into that topic, I also want to know, and I want you to share with others, what you're doing in the chat box if you can. So how are you approaching communication with families during distance learning? A lot of you filled out the survey questions when you registered and said that, you are having constant calls to families through your teachers, through your admin teams, etc. So at your school, how often do teachers call home and who checks that data at your school? So we're going to give you a minute to just type that into the chat. So there's a school that developed a call center, which we think is a really great idea. And I actually saw that response in the survey, and that has made its way into our PowerPoint in a minute. Anybody else have goals around? So we have somebody that says families respond to a daily wellness check via Google form. Staff follows up with anyone that doesn't fill out the form. Yep, awesome. Students can expect at least one coaching call from their teachers each week. That sounds amazing. Teachers call on Mondays and Wednesdays. Great, so they have designated days. Contact the students in their advisory at least once per week. Amazing. Again, feel free to keep these coming in the chat box, because when we send out the recording of the Zoom, we can also incorporate these chat texts in there. So the next area that we're going to talk about, communication. Obviously, this has been on everyone's minds on how can we keep in touch best with our students and our families. And the first tip that we want to give is that it's really important to set an interval goal with teacher input, right? So that means that everyone is on the same page about how often students at your school is going to be communicated. But that also means that, you have a goal that is a shared understanding between the teachers and the admin team that lets them know what is reasonable to put on your teacher's plate or your admin staff members' plates. And that really creates, I think, a stronger community for your school. Another really helpful tip that a lot of schools have adopted already is to designate a lead to check on these items. So, a school can only have so many assistant principals, right? So, for example, one school that is a pretty big high school in New York City has made their department leads, so like history leads or English leads, math leads, check on call volumes each week per teacher or per advisory. That way you're delegating out that work and also making sure that everyone is still completing the calls that need to go out. And we definitely encourage that you keep track of the data as well as keeping it visible. That creates accountability and lets teachers know that other teachers are actually making calls too, because, teachers are not seeing each other every day like they used to. They're not necessarily talking to each other every day. So they may not know, how many calls other teachers are completing at this time. And it is a really good idea to keep track of this and to make this visible for everybody in your school community so that everyone's on the same page with, okay, so everybody else is completing the calls like I am as well. Another note on communication is that during this time, it can be difficult to forget about positive communication, and we definitely encourage that you continue encouraging your students and sending out positive messages. So these are just some of the examples of automated positive messaging that we can send out. So you could say, you've had perfect attendance, or you attended office hour today, great job. And those might just be, optional things. Because again, not every school is requiring attendance. Not every school has office hours at this time, but it's a good idea to capitalize on that and to encourage them whenever they do take advantage of these times. And we also want to note that it's important to set consistency with families and students. Somebody in the group chat had responded that, they have the teachers call home on Mondays and Wednesday. That's amazing, because then the families know for sure these are the days that my school is going to be contacting me about my child. And that could be a good idea for the time that you call on those days as well. So, that families know, okay, at 5 p.m. each day, I'm going to keep an eye on my phone because I know that that's usually the time that my kids' teachers call home. And it might even be a good idea to do a weekly report that's also, again, very timely and has a set set day and time each week that reports on the students' comprehensive progress throughout the week. And again, it creates accountability not only with the students who know that there's going to be a report at the end of the week, but it also creates accountability with your teachers so that they know that they have to put in that data. For those of you who are already Dean's List users, this report is available. If your school has not already been using this, definitely feel free to reach out to us, and then we can put that on your school site and it'll be ready for you to use. For schools that don't have Dean's List, you can definitely create these types of reports using Google Sheet or Excel documents and mail merge and send them out. And again, it's just a really good idea for everybody that's involved to know what type of communication and what depth of reporting it's going to cover per week for families and students. And we definitely encourage that you facilitate two-way communication however you can. So make sure that families know how to contact individual teachers or designated leads on certain subjects, especially because you might not have the same phone number as before when school was available. And in the chat, we saw the response that they have developed a call center, and we think that's a great idea. If you can develop a quote-unquote call center to address meeting not only academic but non-academic needs for families, that would be really helpful, especially since, again, you're probably not in your school building itself. So it's good to send out these types of reminders to teachers, to families, to let them know how they can contact school folks. So that was communication. The next section that we want to cover is providing admin support. So this might have looked like a referral or an incident during the regular school year. But just like when you're physically in school, you want to make sure that teachers have a procedure on reaching out for administrative help whenever they can, right? So this that you see on the screen is just an example of how teachers could record and alert their admin members for support for something that happens in Zoom, something that happens in Google Classroom, or even while they're reading students' assignments or calling home. And this is really important because, just because the students are not physically in school, it doesn't mean that teachers won't need any help, especially regarding tech issues. So you want to make sure that you have clear ideas on, one, what are the kinds of, incident or kinds of guidelines that teachers are going to have for requesting administrative support at your school, and how admin members are going to be receiving that. And this is a good time for you to reframe, referrals and incidents as just admin support. And again, that could be for things as small as tech issues during this time. Next, we're going to talk about assignments. So we're going to be drawing a lot of these best practices from a study that we have taken from the Fordham Institute. Oh, thanks. Sorry. Sorry for that little blip. So there is an article that we will, again, send this out when we are sending out the recorded version of this webinar, but there is an article published by the Fordham Institute on something that a Charter School Network Success Academy is doing in New York City. And the picture that you see are just the guiding principles. And the nutshell of this article basically was, keep everything simple and make sure that everything is clear and easy. And for elementary school students, that might look like, for example, just having them be assigned reading and not any other assignments, and just focus on reading only. And in the meantime, teachers can check in on their students. In this school's case, they check on the students twice per day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And that frees up a lot of the teachers' times because, they are not necessarily lesson planning or giving out assignments and grading them. They're just solely wanting to know, okay, what did you do today and how was it and what is your progress on your reading, etc. For the older students, it might look like, a lot of you are already using Google Classroom and other, tech platforms to give out assignments. But you also want to think about the students who don't necessarily have the greatest access to Wi-Fi or hotspots or laptops, even if your school has provided them with it. Because there could be days, when it doesn't work or something like that. And the best way to keep assignments accessible would be to give out pen and paper assignments. So what that could look like is, the student could just borrow the family's smartphone to write down what the guidelines or the procedures on the homework assignment is. They can copy that down by paper and pen, complete the assignment by paper and pen, just take a picture of it and upload it somewhere or email that into the teacher. And that we have found is a really good way to make sure that everyone, regardless of internet access or technology access, can still have the same, resources and keep up with the schoolwork. And in the chat room, somebody just wrote, if teachers have time, they can set up small group reading sessions online with students because some students may not read independently. That's an amazing idea. And I've seen a lot of pictures on Twitter of, teachers having those calls with students as they read aloud, which is great. And we also, on the note of assignments, we want to make sure that, you know what all your options are, because again, because the day might be structured differently than a normal school day, you might have more room to play around with what teachers' capacity is, right? So we want to keep teachers working smarter, not harder. That's obviously a phrase that we hear a lot in education. So for example, if you have normally 2 teachers teaching, one class with 30 students each, you might be able to combine that so that 2 teachers are teaching a session of ELA with 60 students in it. And that way teachers can divide up their roles and say, I'm going to be the one to lesson plan this week and to facilitate the lesson online, while the other teacher is in the chat room assisting, answering students' questions, holding one-on-one conversations, or grading the assignments themselves. So again, that frees up some teachers' times and is a good way to see where there's room to make sure that everyone's time is spent as best as they can. One response that we got from the survey is that they have not only delegated responsibilities among teachers, but also to students. So you could have students as teaching assistants, and they can broadcast teacher expectations or reiterate due dates, things like that. And that's, I think, a great and also a fun way for students to get involved. The next area and the last area that we're going to go over is reporting and data. So during this time, it might be, this might slip your mind to keep track of data, but we think that it's really important to have teachers and admin members all logging things. And for Dean's List users, again, this is a report that's available to you, but even for schools that don't have Dean's List at your disposal, you can still make, for example, a communal Google Doc or Google spreadsheet where teachers and admin members are logging things in an ongoing document, or you can designate one lead teacher per grade level or per department to be the one to update the sheet. And that's a good way for you to not only see what's going on at your school, but it builds more opportunities for you to look back on your progress and tweak and reassess based on the data. Because again, this is something that, I think none of us have done before, is to have distance learning for such a long period of time. And so you might need to be reassessing and tweaking every so often. One of the responses that I saw in the survey for this session was that, somebody's on their 4th reiteration of procedures of how they're hosting the distance learning days. And I think that's amazing that, it is such a trial and error process, but for schools to be reassessing and changing based on data available is a really great idea. On the note of reporting and data, we also want to make sure that you have room for joy at your school, right? So keep up the school spirit in however, manner you can. So for example, you can continue to celebrate birthdays and achievements for students. And again, for Dean's List users, this birthday report is available to you. And, continue shouting out teachers as well as students. one thing that I keep seeing on social media is, most of your schools, if not all of your schools, have Twitter accounts. And they're shouting out like students of the week, teacher of the week, family of the week. And I think that would be a really good thing for everyone to adopt. One of the responses that I saw in the survey also was that a school has developed or established a quote unquote joy committee. And I think that's a really fun idea for everybody. And to have designated people think about like, okay, how are we going to actually spread our school culture and spirit and joy this week, this month, etc. So that was actually the 5 key areas that we wanted to go over today. And I want everyone to just write in the chat on what you found to be the most useful or what you're doing well. Is there anything that this webinar reinforced for you? Is there a takeaway that you want to take back to your school? Let's see. We have some questions in the chat.
Yeah, Rachel, I'm seeing a really good question from Yesenia about adapting negative and positive actions and school store to meet the remote needs. And I think that's a really good question that I don't know if that we've seen really direct analogies yet. So if people in the chat have ideas about what Yesenia can do, I think that would be really awesome.
Yeah, great idea. We have a vote for various school schedules. We're great to see. So glad to see that. Attendance with family communication. Yes. Awesome. Well, feel free again to keep those ideas coming and to share your takeaways. But in the meantime, I believe our time is up. If you are interested in trying Dean's List for the rest of the year for the first time, definitely feel free to contact us. We are making parts of our service free or at reduced prices to support schools through COVID. And again, if you're already a Dean's List user, feel free to reach out for free messaging center if you don't already have it, for any other daily or weekly reports that we have custom made for the COVID process. Thanks everybody for joining, and we will continue to stay online for the next few minutes to answer any questions, so feel free to keep them coming. But for any of you that have to sign off, thank you so much for joining. And we will definitely be sending out a recording of this with information via email in the next couple of days. Okay, so Marco, Patricia, and Tasha, feel free to let us know if you have any other questions or want to chat with us separately. But if not, in about 2 minutes, I'm just going to end the call for everybody. All right, thanks everyone for joining.